Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey to understand phonology. Think of it like this. You've got an architect creating a blueprint for a building, okay?
Okay.
That blueprint dictates how all the different, materials fit together for the final structure. Phonology is, well, it's kind of like that. It's the mind's blueprint for organizing the sounds of language.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, it's not about how we physically make the sounds. That's phonetics, more like the actual bricks and mortar. Phonology is the underlying plan.
That's a perfect way to put it. And for everyone listening, our goal today is really to give you a clear, sort of insightful grasp of this blueprint without getting too bogged down in uh, super technical jargon.
Right.
We want to show you how languages take a bunch of sounds and systematically arrange them to actually create meaning.
Exactly. And at the heart of this blueprint are two key players. Phonemes and allophones. Let's go back to our building blocks analogy for a sec.
Mm.
Think of phonemes as the really distinct types of blocks, like a red block versus a blue block. Fundamentally different, right? They can change what you build. We show these core sound units with slashes like P or B.
And then the allophones. Those are more like different shades of the same block. You might have, say, a light blue block and a dark blue block.
Right.
They're both still blue, and often they basically serve the same function in the structure. Allophones are just the different ways a single phone can actually be pronounced, usually depending on the sounds around it.
Oh, okay.
And crucially, these variations don't change the word's meaning. We show these with square brackets like P grease for that airy P, or just P.
Okay, so how do linguists, the language detectives, let's say, how do they figure out which sounds are the fundamental red and blue blocks, the phonemes, and which are just different shades, the allophones?
Well, it really all boils down to looking at two main things: contrast and predictability.
Contrast and predictability. Okay.
Yeah. Contrast helps us pin down those core building blocks, the phones. If swapping one sound for another actually changes the meaning of a word, then those sounds are contrastive. They must be different phones.
Like red versus blue blocks changing the look of the wall.
Exactly. And predictability. That helps us spot the variations, the allophones. If the way a sound is pronounced is consistently determined by its neighbors, the sounds around it, it's probably just a predictable variation of one underlying phone. Like knowing you only use dark red blocks in the corners, maybe.
Gotcha. And the real aha moment, the sort of smoking gun for spotting these distinct phonemes, that comes from something called a minimal pair, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you could think of a minimal pair as finding two almost identical recipes,
Okay.
where changing just one single ingredient in the exact same step gives you a completely different dish. In language, it's two words that mean different things and sound exactly alike except for one single sound in the same position.
Okay, that's clear. Give us some everyday examples of these linguistic recipes.
English is full of them. Take pat pate and bat bait.
Okay, yeah.
The only difference is that first sound, P versus B, and they mean totally different things, that one minimal pair. It's really strong evidence that P and B are separate phones in English.
Right, like Cat, Kate, and Matt meet, just swapping the K for M gives you a new word. So K and M are different fundamental sounds.
Precisely. Or how about sip, sip, and zip?
Uh-huh.
Shows that S and Z are distinct.
Cool.
Or fan, fan, and van, vein, showing the difference between F and V. Finding even just one pair like that is a really powerful clue that those two sounds function as independent units, as phonemes, in the language's sound system.
Okay, so finding a minimal pair makes it pretty clear we're dealing with different phones,
Yeah.
different building blocks. But what if we don't find a minimal pair for two sounds? What then?
Good question. Then we need to dig deeper and look at how those sounds are distributed, basically, where they tend to show up in words. There are two main patterns we look for here: overlapping distribution and complementary distribution.
Okay, let's break those down. Overlapping distribution first.
Okay. Overlapping distribution is when two different sounds can occur in the exact same phonetic environment. Think back to the building blocks again.
Right.
If you can put both a red block and a blue block in the exact same spot in your Lego thing, they have overlapping distribution.
Makes sense.
In language, if putting one sound versus the other in that same spot changes the meaning, like our P and B at the start of a word before the et sound in pat and bat.
Which we already established is a minimal pair.
Exactly. That minimal pair demonstrates overlapping distribution where the contrast matters. They're competing for the same slot, and since they lead to different outcomes, different words, they must be fundamentally different units, different phones.
Okay, that makes sense. So if they can compete for the same job and change the outcome, they're different. Now, complementary distribution sounds like the opposite.
It's exactly right. Complementary distribution means that two sounds never ever occur in the same phonetic environment. They have their own kind of exclusive territories within the sound structure.
Exclusive territories, like they don't mix.
Precisely. Let's use a toolbox analogy this time. Imagine you have a hammer and a screwdriver.
Okay.
You would use a hammer to turn a screw, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't use a screwdriver to bang in a nail. They have different non-overlapping complementary jobs.
Right, got it. So how does this idea of different jobs apply to language sounds?
Well, think about the English sound P again. We mentioned it could be pronounced with that puff of air, PB sound, like in pin, or without it, PP like in spin.
Hmm.
What's really interesting here is that you'll typically find the aspirated one, PP, at the beginning of stressed syllables.
Okay, like pin pot.
Right, while the unaspirated one, P, usually pops up right after an S sound.
Like spin spot.
Exactly. They have their own distinct environments. They complement each other. You generally won't find P agrees right after an S, and you won't find the unaspirated P at the very start of a stressed word like pin. This clear complementary distribution is a very strong indicator that they are simply variations, allophones, of the same underlying P phone.
Ah, okay. So because they have these separate predictable roles, these different jobs, they're just different ways of performing the same core sound. Like maybe different ways a builder uses the same type of brick for different spots in the wall.
That's a great way to think about it. Precisely. Now, there's one more type of distribution we should probably mention, just briefly. Free variation. This is where things get a little looser.
Free variation. Okay, sounds intriguing. Tell us more.
Well, sometimes you can have two different sounds occurring in the exact same phonetic spot without changing the meaning. And crucially, there isn't a strict, predictable rule telling you which one to use.
So it's not predictable like the P and P.
Right. It often comes down to things like individual speaker habits, maybe how fast someone is talking, or even just a slight difference in emphasis. It's more optional.
Okay, can you give us a quick example of that in English? Free variation?
Sure. Think about how some people might say the final T sound in the word cat.
Okay, cat.
Some might release it with a little puff of air, like cat Kate. Others might hold it and not release it at all. We write that Kate with a little corner symbol. And some speakers, especially in certain accents, might even use a glottal stop, Kate, that little pouch in your throat.
Right, I've heard that.
For these speakers, using tack or and there doesn't change the fact that it's the word cat. The meaning stays the same. So in this specific spot for these speakers, those sounds in tack, can be seen as allophones of the tack phone, but they're in free variation. You could use one or the other.
Okay, so let me try to recap the detective work here. Minimal pairs are like the gold standard, the best proof for identifying different phones.
Strongest evidence.
Then we look at where sounds actually occur. If they can swap places in the same environment and change the meaning, they're different phones that's overlapping distribution. If they have their own exclusive territories, their own jobs, and never show up in the same place, they're likely allophones of the same phone that's complementary distribution.
Right, assuming they're similar enough sounds to begin with.
Yeah, okay, good point. And sometimes there's this flexibility where different pronunciations can happen in the same spot without changing meaning. That's free variation, which also points towards allophones.
Exactly, you've got it. Linguists tend to follow a kind of logical process. First, they usually check if the sounds are even phonetically similar. I mean, are they plausibly related? Like different kinds of P sounds versus, I don't know, a she sound. They need to be somewhat alike.
Right, like different types of the same building material, not wood versus concrete, maybe?
Good analogy, yeah. Then, second, they hunt for those minimal pairs, the slam dunk evidence. Third, check for overlapping distribution. Fourth, examine complementary distribution for sounds that seem related but don't overlap. And fifth, consider if free variation is maybe what's going on.
It sounds like a really systematic way to uncover the hidden rules, the sort of grammar of sound in a language.
It is, but, like any good detective story, there could be twists, complicating factors.
Oh, like what?
Well, for instance, just because two sounds are in complementary distribution doesn't automatically seal the deal that they're allophones. They also need to be phonetically similar, like we just mentioned.
Right.
Think back to the hammer and screwdriver. They have complementary uses, sure, but they're clearly not just variations of the same basic tool, are they?
No, definitely not.
Same in language. You might find two sounds that never occur in the same place, but they're just so incredibly different phonetically, like the H sound H in English, which only occurs at the beginning of syllables, like in hat. And the ings, sound E, which only occurs at the end of syllables, like in sing. They're in complementary distribution, technically.
Ah, I see where you're going.
But nobody would argue that H and E are just different ways of saying the same underlying sound. They're too different. So similarity is key.
That makes perfect sense. They need to be plausible variations of basically the same kind of sound articulation.
Okay, what's another tricky situation?
Positional neutralization is another interesting one.
Neutralization. Sounds like something gets canceled out.
Kind of, yeah. It's where a distinction between two phonemes, a contrast that exists quite clearly in most other places and the language just disappears, gets neutralized, in one specific environment.
Huh.
A classic one in American English involves T and D. We know there are different phones because of minimal pairs like tie and die, right?
Right. Clear difference there.
But when T or D comes between two vowels and the second vowel isn't stressed, think of words like writer and writer.
Writer, writer. Yeah, they sound almost identical there in the middle. Exactly. For many American English speakers, both the T in writer and the D in writer get pronounced as that quick little flap sound, which we write as
The flap, right.
So in that specific position between vowels, before an unstressed one, the underlying difference, the contrast between T and D, is neutralized. They sound the same on the surface. It's like our different colored building blocks suddenly looking the same color when you shine a specific filter light on them.
Wow. So what we actually hear isn't always a direct one-to-one reflection of the underlying distinctions our minds are making. The blueprint isn't always obvious in the final building, maybe.
Precisely. The surface pronunciation can sometimes obscure the underlying system, and that's why relying only on how sounds are distributed on the surface, just looking at lists of where they appear, can sometimes be a bit misleading or incomplete, especially if you're dealing with a language you don't know well or one with really complex sound interactions.
This is really peeling back layers on something that feels so automatic, so intuitive. It's surprisingly complex.
It really is. And this kind of complexity, realizing that the surface patterns don't always tell the whole story, is part of what led linguists, particularly starting around the mid-20th century, to develop more abstract ways of thinking about phonology, moving towards the idea of underlying forms and phonological rules.
Underlying forms and rules. Okay, what does that shift mean?
Well, instead of just cataloging where each allophone appears, the focus shifted to asking, what's the basic sort of abstract mental representation of a word or a morpheme, the underlying form? And then what are the rules that our brain automatically applies to get from that abstract form to the actual pronunciation we hear, the surface form?
Ah, okay, so it's more about the process.
Exactly. Think of the underlying form as maybe the architect's initial idealized sketch. And the phonological rules are like the specific instructions that construction crew follows, taking into account things like gravity, material stress, local building codes.
Yeah.
They make necessary adjustments to build the final actual structure.
So these rules would explain why we hear, say, the aspirated P in pin, but the unaspirated P in spin. It's not just that they happen to be in different places, but there's a rule causing it.
That's the idea, yes. These rules can do things like add features, like adding aspiration in certain positions. Or they might change features of a sound, maybe delete sounds entirely under certain conditions, or even insert sounds that weren't in the underlying form. And crucially, these rules are thought to apply in a predictable, systematic way. It aims to be a more dynamic and explanatory approach to understanding the sound system of a language rather than just descriptive.
Fascinating. So, okay, to sort of bring our deep dive towards a close here, we've explored phonology, this amazing hidden system, the mind's blueprint for organizing language sounds. We've learned about phonemes, those core meaning-distinguishing sounds like different colored blocks, and allophones, they're predictable or sometimes freely varying pronunciations like the different shades.
Right, the surface variations.
We've seen how linguists use contrast, finding minimal pairs and distribution, overlapping, complementary, free variation to figure out this structure. And we've just touched on this shift towards thinking about abstract underlying forms and the rules that generate what we actually say.
That's a really great summary of our journey, and we really hope that you, our listener, now have maybe a clearer appreciation for the incredibly intricate yet systematic organization that underlies something as fundamental as speaking and understanding language. It's working away under the surface all the time.
Absolutely. And, it really makes you think about those little subtle differences in pronunciation you hear every day. Are they just random mistakes or variations? Or could they actually be these systematic allophones following the hidden rules of the language? Could that person's Mandel SM be a flap because of neutralization? It's definitely something to listen out for more closely in the world around you.
Indeed. Pay a bit more attention to how you and others pronounce things, especially the same word in different contexts, and you might just start noticing some of these fascinating patterns yourself.
Yeah. And if you found this deep dive into the building blocks of language interesting, maybe even fascinating, and you want to explore more bite-sized linguistic insights like this, please do be sure to like and subscribe to the Linguistics in Short YouTube channel. That's also known as Ling in Short.
Great stuff there.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.